Welcome to this session. I know we're going to be standing between you and the nice lunch, but we'll try and make sure that it's as interesting and useful to all of you as it should be. So I request all of you to please come and settle down, and I'll ask the volunteers to present if they can kindly close down the doors. Thank you. My name is Tathagat Verma. Tathagat is not a very common name. Call me TV, that's more handy. I'll be the moderator for this session. And I have three very accomplished entrepreneurs here on the dais with me. What we're going to do in this session is actually going to be a slightly different format than what you're seeing here. We'll have the initial 20 minutes. Let the entrepreneurs talk about some of the problems they've been solving in their own entrepreneurial journey. How did they go about solving the problems? What were some of the challenges? So that some of you who might be the entrepreneurs or budding entrepreneurs can probably get some pointers to them. And then what we're going to do is we have arranged the table, we have arranged the group here in 3 circles, or probably 4 circles if we want to have. I think the 4th one is still getting formed here. So we'll have 4 circles, and after the initial 20 minutes is over, each one of us is going to spend about 8 to 10 minutes with each of the circles, so that maybe you want to pick up some topic and you want to ask some questions to the panelists who are going to come to you by rotation there. So we call it as the speed mentoring, and we're going to spend about 10 minutes with each of the groups, and we'll just keep rotating there. Hopefully that will help us, because we thought instead of having a panel discussion where at any point in time only one of us is going to be answering the questions, we can have better bandwidth there, right? So 4 of us can do that, right? So the topic that we are going to talk about today is starting up the lean way. I know lean is pretty much in the fashion right now. Everyone is talking about lean and how do we do that. How about not blowing up like $2 million and saying at the end of 3 years, hey, that doesn't work, right? So the whole idea is really how do we get to the point of getting a quick validation. I know one of my favorite videos is from a guy of name Paul Hovey. It's on Vimeo, and he actually talks about how he took $40. So he used $40 to do an experiment and made a Grease Monkey script, and he saved $2 million. And 9 months of hard work. So they would have got to a point of failure and a dead end after 9 months and spending $2 million, which he was able to do that within a week by just spending $40. So I think some of those ideas are very, very compelling. And we'll try and understand how some of those experiments, how some of those ideas have been a source of journey and inspiration for our entrepreneurs here. So let me start and get the ball rolling here. The first panelist I would like to introduce here is Maithili. And Maithili has been a very accomplished corporate person. She spent a long, illustrious innings at Wipro and ended on a high note as a senior VP at Wipro after 20 years of her career. And then 5 years back, she did something very radical. She went out and actually thought of creating a market in terms of how can I get the Tier B and Tier B towns into the whole ITO and BPO business. Now, that's not a business that we all were used to, because there was no success model like that before. So she went on to establish Next Wealth. So I would like to actually start asking you, Maithili, how did you go about identifying the problem? What were some of the key challenges you faced? And maybe you can talk a little about Next Wealth, what does it do, so that we have a little better understanding of that. So over to you, Maithili.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. Good morning to all of you. Just a quick introduction to Next Wealth, and I'm just going to then focus on the key challenges. Next Wealth is a social entrepreneurship firm. This is my 3rd startup. The first startup was within Wipro itself, called Zero Markets. And I'm going to bring out the challenges which are key. In each of these startups had a different type of a challenge. So Zero Markets was something that we started on the online e-commerce area, and that was in 2000 during the internet boom. So we wanted to create this e-commerce platform for buying computers and peripherals. But within 6 months of launching, we realized that nobody's coming online and buying, and that's in 2000, right? And the dot-com bust happened immediately thereafter. So here we were, and this was all within Wipro. 6 people who started this within Wipro itself. We had all the models in place. We had all the tie-ups with the Acer and Lenovo, Compaq. We had the dealers in place. We had the franchisees in place. But 6 months later, we found that the dot-com bust happened and nobody's coming online and buying. So the first challenge that I would like to talk about there is strategy. So, in the previous session, I heard somebody talking about the ups and downs of a startup. So what do you do when you have a situation like that? It is something very different in terms of you have to look at a completely different strategy. And strategies keep changing every 3 months. So it's not that you define a strategy and that's what you have to live with for the next 2-3 years. You have to go with the market and look at what the market wants and change according to what the market is looking at. So we actually changed strategies 3 times in that year. We've soon moved from an online exchange to a e-procurement and reverse auctions platform. And I think we were one of the few successful ones in the market at that time. So the first key challenge was defining the strategy, being agile, you like that word, being agile enough to quickly change strategies every 3 months and don't hesitate to do so. Go with what the market wants. That was the first one. The second area that we had was, a second area of startup was, again within Wipro itself. We had just acquired SpectraMind, and SpectraMind was a completely different animal. So myself and TK Kurin, who was there at that time, we both had to move there and completely change the organization. First of all, make the operating margin from 10% to 20%. And second is, we were only 5% back office and 95% voice. So we had to make that 5% to 37% in 3 years and bring in $300 million of business. That was my target. So when I went there, I found there was hardly any team. The team was all the call center, erstwhile SpectraMind. And the moment the acquisition happened, most of them had left. So the challenge that we found at that time was, one, to meet these targets, and second was to build the team. So the second challenge I want to talk about is building a team in any startup organization. So the team we had to build from scratch. We had to recruit the right people for the right areas. We had to build the various practices. We had to build the process. We had to build, we went from handling 6 transitions with 12-year-old experienced people to handling 40 transitions at the same time with 2-year experienced people. And that is possible only if you have the team and the process in place. So that is the second thing that I want to talk about in terms of how critical it is for building a strong team and having a process and structure in place. The third startup, which is currently what I'm doing, which is Next 12, is we set up IT and BPO centers in small towns. You were asking about what was the customer proposition. So today, in the cities, we have a lot of organizations who are recruiting in thousands and lakhs, right? The large organizations. And typically, there is a war for talent, and the attrition is also very high. Some of the BPO companies run at 90% attrition. On the other hand, 60% of the graduate and engineering colleges are concentrated in the small towns. And out of every 100 people who pass out, 30 come to the city looking for a job, but 70 stay back. And these are first-generation graduates, so parents are tailors, farmers, policemen, and they obviously cannot join their parents' profession, nor are they getting any job which is commensurate with their education. So on one hand, you have demand in the city, on the other hand, you have the supply in the small towns. So what we do is, instead of bringing them to those cities, we take the work to the small towns. And therefore, that's the social entrepreneurship part of providing jobs to the people in the small towns. So our vision is to provide 10,000 jobs in the small towns. That's the proposition. So for the graduate, even if they earn 10,000 there in the small town, they save 90%. Whereas even if you earn 25,000 in the city, you hardly save anything. So clear value proposition. We do this through an entrepreneur model. So we appoint entrepreneurs locally. And for the entrepreneurs, they earn about 13 to 14% margin. So even if it's 5 crores turnover, 13, 14% margin in that place, in a small town, is very good money. So we are building managers and ecosystems from the grassroots. So it's not about giving jobs, it's about impacting the local ecosystem. That's the second value of this thing. As far as the end customer is concerned, as compared to a metro, very low attrition, easy available manpower, at least 40% lower costs, and the work is outsourced to a place where the quality is equivalent to that of a metro. So the third challenge here that we currently have, so we don't have a team problem, we don't have a strategy problem, we don't have a process problem, but the third challenge is customer acquisition and scaling up. So these 3 are the critical challenges. When we started, we thought we will have a challenge in terms of finding entrepreneurs who have the capability to execute, not a challenge at all. There are enough entrepreneurs in the small towns. In fact, we had 150 entrepreneurs from places like Patna, Lucknow, and Guwahati writing in saying, I want to start a center here, I want to start it. And they're all in their late 20s and early 30s. So, it is just fantastic to looking at that. So the third challenge here is basically in terms of the customer acquisition, and scaling up. So team and process, strategy, and customer acquisition. These three, I think, are the key challenges that we have faced.
And apart from the skill set, you find their ethics and professionalism is not anywhere lesser than what we selfishly believe that only Bangaloreans are entitled to.
No, their attitude and commitment is fantastic. So we have 40 customers, and not a single customer have we missed a metric in any of the weeks or the months that we have been operational in. And that's purely due to their attitude and commitment.
Amazing story. I'm sure the traffic is also less there.
Right, absolutely.
Okay, thanks, Maithili. We'll come back to you a little later there. Let me introduce our second panelist here, Zainab is from Bangalore. I have a question to her. She has been in several roles. She started her journey as an ethnographer, and what she does is, as the founder and CEO of HasGeek, she has actually built the super techie community of India. And to my question to her is really, how did she go about taking an idea to actually identifying, hey, this is a community of passionate people, and they don't go around with a placard on their forehead that says, I'm a passionate techie. So how did she go about identifying them, getting them on the same page, building a community that talks the same language, and I guess most importantly, beyond that, how did she turn it into a sustainable business model? So I'm sure we'll have a good set of stories. I know I've asked a lot of questions to you, but...
Yeah, I think the first correction is I'm actually from Bombay who moved to Bangalore, but I've been told that if you live in a city for more than 5 years, you actually belong to that city. So it's been 9 years now in Bangalore. So just to give a brief introduction, I'm Zainab. I run a company named HasGeek. We operate in the space of media. What we do is we organize a number of top technical conferences in India, and each of these conferences are our own brands. We don't offer doing events as a service. So we organize each of these conferences, and each of them is now almost like either a Hollywood film or a magazine that comes out every year. So it's an annual conference. I run this company with my co-founder Kiran, and the original idea of HasGeek was really Kiran's. Kiran was one of the first people who started bar camp in Bangalore, and one of the realizations was that a community is a community because it looks for conversations. So there is a very strong correlation between community and conversations. You become part of a community because you want to have conversations. Now, how do you have those conversations? I suppose in the internet era, it was very sexy to have conversations online. But one of the realizations that Kiran had from bar camp was that you need an offline event, or you need an offline activity that pulls the community together regularly so that these conversations can then sustain online. You cannot always have an online conversation because, mailing lists were wonderful at one point in time until they started to become a beast because they were overcrowding our email. You have various other platforms that you use for having conversations, and over a period of time, you either get exhausted by them or the platforms die because they are not evolving with you. So how do you kind of keep this community together? The idea then was that we would organize conferences around very, very niche and focused topics, and use these conferences as a way to build the community and then take the conversations online. So the two learnings for us immediately were community equals conversations, and offline is extremely critical to pull the community together. Now, organizing conferences is extremely non-sexy for a lot of people. I mean, what are you doing out here? You're building a non-scalable business. But we realized that the only way in which we could actually build the audience and the community was by organizing very, very focused conferences. So for instance, we organize a conference called RootConf, which is specifically on DevOps. You cannot be a JavaScript developer over here. You have to have DevOps as practicing experience in order to participate in this conference as a speaker and as a participant. We organize a conference called the Fifth Elephant, which is specifically on data science and machine learning. And again, you have to kind of have the necessary background to participate. Similarly, we organize a JavaScript conference, and that has the same prerequisite. Now, the point is that we've also been very particular about within each of these events, who is the kind of audience that we are actually reaching out to. We're very particular that to be a speaker and to be a participant, you have to be a practicing developer. You cannot come on stage and just talk about something which is fluff or something which is very abstract. You have to be able to give very concrete takeaways to the audience, because what the audience is looking for is not just patterns, but also anti-patterns. You're trying to look at what works and what doesn't work, because what doesn't work gives you an insight into what is it that you don't have to take back to your workplace.
The other thing is, if you look at, if you look at 100% of developers, we're not trying to reach out to 100% of developers. We're very clear that we're looking at just the top 10 to 20% developers who are very passionate about technology, not necessarily interested in doing a startup, because not every techie wants to do a startup. A good techie wants to become a better techie. That you have actually made contributions to open source. So we were also very clear right from the beginning that when we are organizing conferences, each of these conferences, most of the talks are going to be on open source. If you decide to talk about a closed source technology, you have to pay to speak at our stage, and even that undergoes scrutiny. So this year, in fact, we even rejected keynotes from sponsors by saying we don't want your money, we want to ensure there's quality content for the audience. So we've, in the process of actually building these conferences, and each of these conferences is literally 5 years old now, they're already in their 5th and 6th edition, we've stuck to a whole bunch of ground rules which have actually helped us to build both the community as well as the audience. Like I said, open source critical, you have to be able to talk on stage and give an insight that a person can actually take back. There has to be a learning for the audience, for every participant to take back. So you must speak about open source. We make sure that content is extremely independent of sponsorship and sales. So which means a sponsor cannot just come on stage and ramble. Neither does every sponsor get a speaking slot. We also make it very clear that if you're a sponsor, you don't get a speaking slot. And that is something that has helped us to build goodwill in the community, because then a lot of, in the early days when we started out, people were very skeptical about conferences, because they said, oh, you go to a technical conference and you have marketing talks, or whether Microsoft want to talk about this product and Google want to talk about that product. So we were very clear that we are not doing marketing talks over here. We are actually getting practicing developers on stage to come and speak to other practicing developers. So there's more peer-to-peer learning. And we've stuck by that. So we've made it very clear that content is independent of sponsorships and sales. So a sponsor doesn't get speaking time by virtue of sponsoring. If you do submit a proposal independently to speak, that will be evaluated. That brings me to the third angle, which is that we've also ensured that our content operates in a very tight knit fashion, which is we've built our own tool, it's called Funnel. Everybody is invited to submit a proposal, and the proposal is then evaluated by an editor and sub-editor. We make sure that we choose editors and sub-editors as individuals who are passionate about community and about conferences, which means that they have an interest in wanting to grow the community, but at the same time they have enough exposure of international conferences to bring back best practices. Because if we go back to the first rule that community equals conversations, it's not just about having talks in a conference, but it's also about being able to curate experiences outside of talks which enable people to have conversations. So for instance, we have a number of birds of feather sessions at our conferences which are on very focused topics like infrastructure automation, how do you cope with burnout as a DevOps person, and things like that. So these are very, very focused talks. So the editor and sub-editor will then scrutinize every proposal. Every speaker has to submit an outline for their talks. We make sure that, a speaker doesn't just get random 45-minute stage time. If it's necessary, we make sure that we tell the speaker, you got to reduce your content, bring it down to this much, because we feel the learning is so much. So we have a very, very elaborate and tight-knit process of curating content and experience at the conference. And we've also, I think by virtue of saying that you have to speak about open source, we've also been able to make a dent in large enterprises and among corporates, and also among other companies, where now we have organizations coming up and sponsoring by saying, we've realized that it's valuable to be able to speak about our technology openly to the audience, because if you have closed source technology, it is that much difficult to onboard engineers and new recruits. So I think we've stuck to a lot of these maxims which have helped us to develop a lot of goodwill in the community, and that's also helped us to build the audience. So I think if I have to just summarize quickly, focus is extremely critical. In every conference, we make sure the focus is very, very tight, and if it's a problem area like data science, for instance, is not a technology problem, it's a problem area. We try to make sure that the theme is aligned in a way that sort of looks at current trends and brings in the right set of people, so that the conversations are also more focused. So focus is critical. It is important to be able to do an offline activity to pull the community together to then continue the conversations, and it's extremely important to stick by a number of maxims in order for you to be able to build that goodwill in the community, because the only way you will be able to grow your business and your community is by having more and more of goodwill. So currently the way it works for us is our speakers just bring our own sponsors. It's completely become like an outbound process now. I barely make a sales call. I just the moment I announce a conference, I attended your conference last year, I want to sponsor, or I spoke at your conference. And if I were to also summarize quickly, the way the model works is we deal with three parties when we are organizing a conference. We deal with a participant, we deal with a speaker, and we deal with a sponsor. For the participant, the way the model works is we've made it very clear right from the beginning that everyone pays to attend the conference, so that if there's no sponsor, there is still a conference, and the basic costs of the conference are covered by the participant fees. For a speaker, you have to be a practicing developer, you have to submit a proposal, and you have to have the humility to go through the entire process. So we will not take proposals from people who will say, oh, I will get my secretary or I'll get my other person to like submit a proposal. Make it right clear from the beginning that you have to speak to us directly if you are sort of planning to speak at our conference. We rarely invite people to speak. If we invite to speak, it is only because we realize that a certain person has a certain reputation and has done something significant, and by inviting that person, we will also be able to gather more and more people to come up and speak, because it's really hard to be able to get speakers. Speaking is tough. It requires a lot of effort, and one of the ways to motivate is by saying, okay, look, your peers on stage have done this much. Do you want to come forward and speak? So I think by now we've also managed to build a very strong 400 plus army of speakers, and every year we ensure that we don't repeat speakers, but in fact that we build these speakers through year on. We build and we discover new speakers year on year. So our speakers almost like now, like Bollywood stars, where the idea is if you come and speak at a HASGI conference, your own value proposition actually increases. So yeah, I guess I probably overshot my time, but I'm sure.
Just to ask,
Yeah.
so none of the speakers get paid for speaking, right?
No, no.
And they all come and because they believe that it's a prestige issue, it's an epitome of professional.
I think it's also saying that, I mean, this is my community, these are my peers,
Right.
and I want to show off what I've done over here. So there are enough motivations. One of them is I want to show off the cool things that I've done here. So a number of our speakers have actually built stuff.
Cool.
They've built libraries. I mean, we've had people like Viral Shah, who is the co-creator of Julia Language. He's been a speaker with us. Shyam Sheshadri, who was one of the teams who built AngularJS, has been one of our speakers. We've had some very top-notch speakers who've actually sort of built their own communities and have built their own projects by virtue of showing off over here.
Sure. So I'll just keep proceeding in the interest of time. Just one question, if I can ask you, if I'm allowed to ask. Do you guys make enough money?
Yes,
Because since it's a lean startup conference, I just want to make sure
yeah, so
that we understand, right?
So we've made enough money to sustain the organization for 5 years. This year, in fact, has been pretty good to us in the sense that this is the first time in the year when I've been able to sleep without thinking, do I have enough money in the bank to pay the salaries next year?
Awesome.
But the first 3 or 4 years had been a tremendous amount of struggle, but I suppose just by virtue of sort of sticking to the principles and saying, we will not do things this way. In fact, we will ensure that we go all along to ensure the content is high quality. So this year has been particularly interesting. Next year, the bubble may burst.
Sure, thanks for sharing. I think it's a great story of how one takes a passion, builds a community around the passion, and then ultimately is able to convert that into a business model. So I'm sure we'll get to, the participants will get to hear more about it in the speed mentoring session. And let me go to our third panelist who has come all the way from London here. Welcome, Kavita, to Bangalore. Somebody who has been actually very lucky to have been a part of the London 2012 organizing committee. So I'm sure all of the participants can also ask some questions about some of those experiences. But in your own journey, Kavita, how has it been for you? You've been actually in the process of, you've taken an idea and you've taken it to the next logical step, and you've had
we don't make enough money.
You don't make enough money? Okay, so I'm sure you're on the path to doing
I
it.
need to make a
Well,
lot more
actually, we
money.
don't know what is the definition of enough for you, right? So I think
yeah,
that's what it
true.
is. So
Enough to fly to Bangalore.
enough to
I
fly
think.
down to Bangalore, yeah. So how has been your own journey in terms of how did you really go about incubating the idea? You were telling about the idea, how a lot of good ideas in London actually happen there, right? It's like a couple of friends
always
get
in the
together.
pub. We
Always in the
have a
pub,
good
right?
pub,
So
yeah.
I think pub is a great watering hole for a lot of people. So yeah, I mean, I would love to get an idea like that. So how did you actually take the idea and bring it to the next level of its progression? And what were some of the challenges you faced? Were you able to have a target in mind and then just keep cruising, or did you have to kind of pivot? If you would like to share some of that.
So you always have to pivot, right? So absolutely. So my friend Anne and I were working at a company called Fig Leaves, which is a underwear and swimwear company. If you've ever been online, it's awesome. And we had this thought that we were looking at returns, and we realized that people were buying 3 swimming costumes, exactly the same, 3 different sizes, and returning 2. We knew at the point that they sent the order in that we were going to get 2 back. It was like, this is a ridiculous idea. There must be a way to fix it. So Anne suggested, why don't we just use our size guide, make it more interactive, and put some measurements in? And me being skeptical and a proper Brit, I kind of went, that's not going to work. So, but I tell you what, let's go lean, and actually this is 2008, so we don't even know the word lean at this point. I was like, let's test it. Let's build it and test it. So we put a form together. We went, as I said, went down the pub, spent one day. We had like 6 hours while, you know, both of us, our partners were at home, and we were able to get a big meal, get our computers out. And what we did, so you're quite a technical audience, we actually just built a Drupal PHP page with a case check for sizes. Very straightforward mashup between size guides and what was going on. Sorry, is that better? Cool. And, and that's too loud now. And so what we did was we tested it with, going back to your question, your statement earlier, $40. We tested it with £100 of Google AdWords. We went online, we just asked people to come to our page and checked out whether they used it or not, because that's all I was testing. That was my skepticism, right? Why would you use a thing like this? Why can't you just do it yourself? It was off the scales. 64% of the people who came to this site used it, gave us real email addresses, which is never done, right? But more importantly, they were all women. That was one of the first things that we tested, so they all turned out to be women. And the other exciting thing for me was that it gave us the name, What's My Size, which actually is probably now that we've now got competitors and there's an industry, is still the most memorable name in the industry. And it came from the Google AdWords. So that was our first test. We created it, we put it online, we went back to our day jobs, we didn't think about it for a little while, it ticked over, it got some users, it worked. And then we both moved on to new jobs, and we thought, actually, Anne moved into freelancing, and we went, wouldn't it be great if we could get some money? And actually, wouldn't it be great, rather than just getting a size guide and saying, this is my size in this store, what if I could just see all the sizes on the search engine? So like, as Google, this predates Google searching for products. So it's like, that's a good idea, let's try that. So we came up with the idea, decided that we would raise money. And we raised money from the Technology Strategy Board. So at a completely different level to my colleagues here, we actually raised 40 lark from the Technology Strategy Board. But that pivoted where we were as a business. We were two mates down the pub who had now become into a joint venture framework between ourselves and the actual organization that had given us the money. We had legal paperwork to do. We actually had responsibilities with this money. Our friendship changed as well. It was a really interesting moment. We went from being friends to business partners, and that was quite a big deal. So that pivot came, 18 months passed. It was really successful again. By successful, I don't mean financially, I mean by users. Loads of users came on the site. What we found was that people with extreme sizing were using it, so people who were dieting or people who were underweight or putting weight on. We fast forward another 18 months. At this point, I'm at the Olympics, and I'm like, you know, burnt out and need another job. Anne has also moved on to other freelancing projects, and we kind of have a third friend at this point who phones me up, and she says, you know, what are you going to ever do with this product? What are you know, it's sat there on the internet for ages. We love it. Do something with it. And she said, look, I'll tell you what, you should turn it into a SaaS product. And that's where we are today. So we actually raised financing between the three of us. We created a company. We are an all-woman board director, except our finance director, who, you know, other gender. And we're actually an all-male dev team. So we're 8 people. We're in like 6 different countries. We all work virtually. The SaaS product sits with retailers, so it actually sits on the retailer side. It's just a JavaScript drop-in. And that's been a really exciting process. So our biggest pivot to date is where we became a company. Instead of being business partners with someone who became my best friend, you know, we are now on the same board, which is quite a bizarre position to be in.
So thanks, Kavita, and I'm sure Kavita has been a global citizen. I'm sure she'll has a lot of perspective of behind actually how does one go about starting a company in various other customs and cultures and so on, not to mention the country, the laws of the land and so on. So I'm sure we all can benefit from some of her learnings as well. So here's what we're going to do now. We are in the speed mentoring now. Each one of us will go to each one of the circles, and if you have any questions that you want to kind of ask them based on their work, or if you have any specific questions, or even a hypothetical question, we all will be there for about 5 to 7 minutes, and then we will kind of keep changing our positions there. The last 2 minutes before it, we'll all come back here and kind of recap the whole thing there. So I'll be the timekeeper as well, and I'll make sure that we all come back and do that. You won't be missing your lunch, so that's for sure, right? Okay, so I would welcome the panelists to kind of take a chair in one of the circles.
What is the key takeaway? We're going to have panelists come in and go. So if somebody can just summarize what happens here, and at the end of it, we just have them present the key takeaways from this table. Guys, I need a lead from this table who will know what's happening here, and at the end of it, the panelists are going to keep what is this takeaway? Summarize the key takeaway.
Thank you. Okay.
Make it 8 minutes, okay? Lovely. I'm going there.
You could switch here. She needs to finish. Thanks, Anna.
vanished. Yeah, seriously. 10 out of 10 vanished. Someone said, well, and I had this hypothesis that it was going to work because we had had some conversations that, okay, maybe there is an opportunity to work together. They were not. So I was down to only one business model. And
So the customer might decide, okay, the one example was the person was Tutor Vista. They got acquired by Pearson. With Tutor Vista, we were doing tutoring to students in the US for higher grade math, online and using whiteboard and chat. The area we want to be, we are largely into books, we sell 6 million books across the world, and we want to continue with the conference. That is one. We have 200 people doing this. Then we decided to go to a center. We wanted to be bottom up. And one of the requirements was all the centers should be books. Starting with the business model, basically they are outsourcing the work to us. So their model changed. There is another company called Giant. What they can
About the USP of your business, and if you find aunts and uncles who have a lot of money, it's the best to approach them and get the funds from them. Another question was, how do we expand abroad? So this question was about expanding abroad. So the thing was, understand the cultures there. The same thing happens when our companies come to India. And one example that was quoted was Naveen from InMobi wanted to expand in China, and he was told no, he cannot. So he questioned people who said he cannot, that have you tried it? So he went ahead, and now he has already expanded in China. So if somebody says don't do it, go ahead and try and do it. Maithili came over to our team, and then the questions were about when is the right time to take a plunge into the startup world. That's the question many people are having. One thing is, do not leave when you're low and frustrated. Leave at a time when you're really high, when you're in your top position, and that is a good time to leave. And also, when you're really passionate, that passion is there throughout and it's really calling you, that's another time to leave. And then another thing is, how do you upskill yourself how do you upskill yourself? The answer for that is approach early adopters, attend conferences, pitch your ideas, start up in the lean startup mode, and then and also be very humble and approach people and let them know that you're really not you're really not aware about the current skills. Learn from people and then upskill yourself.
Thanks all. We really had good questions. First, we met Maithili, and the questions which were asked is how much traction is good. The second question was how much money should be used for marketing, or how much should be used for product development. So the answer really was to first get the customers through digital or digital marketing, Google Ads, and retain them by building the product along with their guidance, some of the custom thing that you can do for them, that would be an added advantage. And then tie up with different dealers who are already set, like Amazon or Snapdeal or any retailer who is big enough, so that they can help you get your customers. And then also partner with some of the firms like Portia, who does not have that feature which you are offering. So they will have an added advantage of getting that feature, and you will get your customers. The next question was, for a social enterprise, is profit important? And it was answered that profit is important, but not to the level which other companies are doing. So around 10 to 15% is what is good, considered good, versus 25% which is considered for other organizations. And then the questions was that if you have an idea, what point of time would you leave your job and try to implement it? So the answer is, no, don't jump into it. Test the idea first. If you find it working, then you plan for it, prepare a blueprint, prepare the operational part of it, and then only go for it. Thank you.
Okay, the first topic was about social entrepreneurship. So we discussed about what would be the viable models, business models. So Tathagat gave us some good insights about Kira and also about few other models, so which was very interesting about how do we manage money. The second talk was with Zainab. It was mainly about how to find investors and also about how did she was able to verify her business model. So she excellently explained us that how she tried out, how her first conference went and how her first year went, and how much should be our appetite for risk taking. So it's not never a bed of roses. The last conversation was with Kavita, thank you. And it was more about how do we find our co-founders and how do we find like-minded people, and also about how do we sustain in whatever we found. So that's the quick gist of our circle. Thank you.
Thanks, Lakshmi. And I definitely don't want to stand between everybody and lunch, so I'm going to make it real quick. The summary of all that we could hear was, in our group was, first of all, challenges in HasGeek, what they're thinking. I think all of us learn about blogging, content, conference, scaling of it, so thank you for that one. From Tathagat, 11 models didn't work, 10 models didn't work, and 1 did. So the agility and all that we require when we are going the startup way. From Maithili, the operation excellence, the processes, and the timing of startup. I think that's what I could learn from you. But thank you for that.
Thank you. This was a wonderful session. Small memento to all our great panelists.
Thank you so much, Tathagat. This was fantastic. Thank you, Zainab. You did a great job.